50 years and $1 trillion later, America, it seems, has lost its appetite to wage war on marijuana. Hello, and welcome to The Agenda. I'm your host, Kerwin Gaines. On this episode, we will be speaking to Delaware lawmakers, law enforcement, and community activists about why it has been a challenge to legalize marijuana in the state of Delaware. In 2011, the Delaware Medical Marijuana Act was approved, showing the state agreed with medical professionals that the plant has a medicinal benefit. In December of 2015, Delaware's law decriminalizing the use of the herb went into effect, making possession of up to 1 ounce punishable by a $100 fine with no possibility of jail time. Representative Ed Ozinski, a Democrat from Stanton, has been working on the legalization of recreational use since 2017. His most recent attempt, House Bill 150, was on the floor before the session ended in June. We know that you, in the final, days of the assembly or the session, you've been pretty busy with the marijuana bill.
I've been busy a couple years now with the marijuana bill.
Tell us about that. What's the history of this?
Sure. Back in 2017, colleagues of mine, Margaret Rose Henry in the Senate and Representative Helene Keeley, actually first introduced HB 110. Then they passed House Concurrent Resolution 52, which created the Adult Recreational Marijuana Task Force. That task force report came out in 2018. So the second leg of the 149th session, they got the HB 110 on the House agenda. Unfortunately, it did not receive the 3/5 majority, which is 25 votes, to pass the House. So back in 2019, I picked up the legislation after those colleagues of mine retired. 2019, I got it out of committee, but it did not make the agenda. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and slowed us up there for the second half. And so this year, I brought it back. We did a redraft, so now it's HB 150. We changed some things. We added language for micro businesses, which we picked up from the Jersey bill. We added the social equity language, because you have to understand, we've been watching what's been happening around the country with recreational marijuana laws, and it's ever evolving. So our team, and when I say team, that's Alexis Scaletti, Sarah Wooten, there are policy advisors, and Kyle Schwab, who's my legislative aide. They've all been doing the research and following what other states have been doing. So we've been trying to incorporate some of what the other states have had success with, and we think would be beneficial to Delaware. So we drafted HB 150. We've got that through the Health Committee. It got through appropriations, so that's further than we got it in 2019. So it got on the agenda. We had to wait till after appropriations, so it pushed it to the agenda in June. Prior to getting it on the agenda, we also had conversations with many of the state agencies that said they had concerns. So to address those concerns, we had several amendments. So we filed those amendments right before the bill was scheduled to get on the agenda.
You've experienced some pushback from law enforcement, and I believe the governor was kind of teeter-tottering back and forth on it and just didn't see it as favorable. What is your response to that?
My personal feeling is, he knows what's going on in New Jersey, what's going on in Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania. All these states are talking about passing this legislation. So my personal feeling is, if I did get it through both houses of the assembly, he would either let it become law or he would sign it. But that's his call. My job is to get it on his desk.
So the pushback from law enforcement, were you expecting that? Have you had a conversation with them? How has that been going?
No, they've always been upfront and said they oppose it. I've tried to have some conversations with them. I think if you've seen some of the articles and some of the statements they made, they have concern because they still use marijuana for probable cause reasons to make bigger arrests. But my argument on that is there are still things that are illegal with this legislation. One, you cannot consume it in public. So the odor of marijuana would still be a probable cause. You cannot drive around in your vehicle, transport it in open packages. So again, if there was a traffic stop and if there was odor of cannabis or the site of an open container, that's still probable cause. So they still said they'd come out and oppose it.
And it isn't a bridge that we can cross through communication. Is it something, or is it just taboo and they're just not going to see it any other way? Is that your feeling?
That's my feeling, because I have tried to have that conversation to reassure them that they'll still be able to, in some means, use cannabis. Oh, and also, you have to be 21. So if an underage person was caught with it, it's reasons for getting to those larger offenses that they claim they would lose that if this legislation passed.
The legalization of marijuana, especially around the tri-state area and even across the country, has just become not a big deal anymore. I mean, so many people have just become accustomed to it, and you don't have to go far to find it. But in order to start that legislation and to start that process, and I know you were speaking before about your predecessors and how they were working towards, but where does this come from for you? Why do you feel the need to aid in the legalization of it in our state?
Well, I think the prohibition was completely wrong when it was originally established. I think they ignored the science. There's reports that were done back then to try to help the federal government make that decision, and they ignored it. So I think the prohibition has always been wrong, and I think it's hurt more people. It's hurt people with getting a good education. It's hurt them from getting good housing. It's hurt them from getting good jobs. It's just been a bad policy. So, and I think most Delawareans know that now. So, the polling says 61% Delawareans support this legislation. So it's a little frustrating. It's been so long to get this thing passed. But like you said, when you have the governor coming out against it, you have law enforcement, you have the Chamber of Commerce here in Delaware, you have AAA concerned about road safety. These are some powerful groups down in Lake Hall. But I do think we're chipping away at it. So I have no intentions on giving up. I do think Delawareans want this. And my disappointment is, one, there's still going to be people getting charged for this. There's going to be consumers of this, and eventually they're going to be able to drive right across the Delaware Memorial Bridge to get it. So you're going to have the continuation of people using this product, and we're not going to see any of the benefits. The biggest benefit of this is ending the illegal market, creating a brand new industry that doesn't exist right now. There's 125 licenses for businesses in this bill, and all the jobs those entrepreneurs will create. That's the real shame here, is that we have to put that off. I think Delaware needs to get this done. I think eventually the federal government will change their regulations on this. Then that will open up interstate commerce, and you'll be able to, it'll be able to be sold and transported across state lines. Right now, with the federal regulations, if we pass this legislation, what is ever sold in Delaware has to be grown and manufactured here in Delaware.
Despite more than 60% of Delawareans agreeing that it's time to legalize marijuana, Osinski's latest bill did not make it out of committee. Debate has moved beyond whether it will become legal, to questioning whether any law can undo the damage done by the war on drugs in an equitable way. Since Nancy Reagan uttered those infamous words, "Just say no," Black and brown communities have been disproportionately targeted and punished for marijuana charges by law enforcement. According to a 2020 study done by the ACLU, Black people are 3.5 times more likely than white people to be arrested for marijuana possession. In some states, that figure rises to almost 10 times more likely. Members of the Delaware Black Caucus have said they will not support any legalization of marijuana unless the law answers the equity question. But Delaware lawmakers also want to know who will profit.
What we have to recognize is the number of Black and brown and poor people who have entered the prison, who have been negatively impacted because they sold marijuana. They too need to be recognized. So if we're going to make this legal, then what about those folks who have already suffered as a result of selling marijuana.
Cannabis prohibition has been fundamentally based and perpetuated in racism, starting from 1937 with the original prohibition law, going into the 70s with the Nixon administration and the Controlled Substance Act. Delaware is actually has the 15th highest racial disparities in the entire country. And what we're seeing with prohibition is significant racial disparities in arrests here in the state of Delaware.
Most bills, a lot of bills might get 1 or 2 amendments. You know that a bill has some issues when it gets 3 or 4 amendments. Last I counted, this bill has 10, and I have at least 2 more. So that makes it 12 amendments. That's how you know either opposition is trying to kill a bill with amendments, or in this case in particular, the bill's just not ready for prime time. It's just simply not ready.
Looking at some of the reasons why many think it did not pass, there's definitely the equity issue that's inside of it, and the allowance for folks that have been, I guess, placed into the system through drug offenses or family members and kind of placed to the front of the line in regards to licensing for developing the business side of the marijuana and the distribution side of it.
So the bill as it's currently written, and again, there are amendments, multiple amendments around this particular section. The bill as it's currently written divides licensing, and in particular for retail, what we're talking about, into small businesses. There's a certain amount for small businesses. There's a certain amount for large businesses or unlimited businesses. And then there's the social equity license, is the one you're talking about. And it says that if you were charged with any marijuana crime, or a family member was charged with any marijuana crime, except for distribution to a minor, if you have been guilty of any of those crimes, you go straight to the front of the line, and it gets you straight to the front of the line to get one of these social equity licenses. Now, there's more to it than this. It's an oversimplification. But there were those of us who argued maybe that's not the best way of doing it.
I don't necessarily see it as entering the front of the line. I see it as equity, ensuring equity, and possibly righting some of our wrongs.
You know, we're talking about the legacy industry. You fast forward to the way that legalization is being implemented in the states that have legalized, and we're seeing that the majority of the businesses are white owned. However, people are still serving time in jail for the exact same conduct. There's politicians that want to say, no, those people can't be included in this industry to make money, but we're going to take all the genetics and the superior product and everything that's been cultivated over the last 85 plus years of cannabis prohibition, take everything that they've worked for, and now make money off of it, while those same people, are left with a criminal conviction that leaves them, having difficulty even just being a successful member of society. And it's just unjustifiable and it's unfair.
What we imagine would happen if there is no even or level playing field is this: any individual who is affluent, who knows the right people, those will be the individuals who will benefit from this new market. And as we have seen over and over again, those of less affluence will not benefit. So that piece gave individuals who would otherwise be carved out an opportunity to participate in this market.
Senator Coons, welcome back to the Washington Minute.
Thanks, Karen. Good to be with you.
Always good to see you. So briefly, in the state of Delaware right here, we had legislation passed that the minimum wage is going to go up. And I know you guys tried to do it down in Washington. How did that go? How's it going to transition back here to Delaware?
Well, we need 60 votes to pass an increase in the minimum wage. I think we should do that before the end of the year in Washington. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, now that so many businesses and restaurants are recovering, and now that it's passed here in the state of Delaware, I think the chances that we will get a broad support to increase the federal minimum wage, to index it so that it goes up with inflation, and to make changes to other parts of the minimum wage program, I think are much higher. I will support increasing the minimum wage federally, comparable to what we're doing here in Delaware.
And everybody here in Delaware is looking forward to that as well, especially for the folks that are having trouble making ends meet. Another big thing going on is something at the University of Delaware. Tell us a little bit about that.
So at the University of Delaware, there's an Institute for the Manufacturing of Biopharmaceuticals. That means making vaccines and drugs. 5 years ago, it got a $70 million federal grant to get it off the ground. That was matched 2-to-1 by companies and other governments and universities. 5 years later, it got a dramatic expansion grant, $150 million, just announced last week. This will create a great platform here in Delaware to strengthen manufacturing as we look forward to making the next generation of vaccines and pharmaceuticals and therapeutics.
So everybody's wondering about the infrastructure bill. We've talked about it a couple times already. I think people are waiting for the money to roll out.
Well, that money won't roll out for weeks or months, but we are this close to finalizing the text of the bill. My guess is that'll happen over this weekend. There were a few issues that cropped up in the last 2 days that we had to chase down. But I expect it'll be on the floor of the Senate next week. This will be $1.2 trillion in infrastructure spending over 8 years. It's $580 billion in new spending over the next 5. That'll be money for everything from broadband, roads, highways, bridges, tunnels, airports, ports. It'll make an enormous difference for the state of Delaware and the country. This will be a generational investment. It'll put a lot of people to work, and it'll make our economy stronger and more competitive globally.
Well, we look forward to all of that.
Thanks.
We look forward to seeing you again on the Washington Minute. From criminal implications to small business ownership, there's a lot at stake. State Auditor Kathy McGinnis released an independent report in January of this year, highlighting a potential financial impact of legalizing marijuana. From taxes to jobs, a new industry of this size will bolster the economy in several ways. Ms. McGinnis, thank you for joining us here on the agenda.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. It isn't often times that you can talk to the state auditor about marijuana.
That's true.
But today we're having that conversation.
We are.
And in January, you put together a very detailed report in regards to marijuana and how it affects taxpayers and the whole industry. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So our office is within our realm. We do many types of engagements. People usually just think we do audits or financial audits. We do performance audits, investigations, inspections, examinations, and special reports. And we are to look at economy and efficiency of state government, on business-like practices. It's all in Title 29. And this falls under that realm of our responsibility. So what we've done is used sound data to be able to provide and show that there's an estimated of potential of $43 million if we were to legalize marijuana. You take the total population, and then there are surveys to find out of who actually admits for adult use.
And that's the important thing, who admits it.
Who admits it? I could be a little higher. And then, so you take that number, and we estimated about $2,000 a year. That could be higher as well. And then we used a 20% tax rate, which every state can use whatever they want. So we were kind of comparing ourselves to Washington and Colorado and extrapolating down. And that's where we came up with the $43 million. So we thought that was a very large number. You have to look at our surrounding states. You have to look at what's going on in the country. I mean, 37 states have medicinal marijuana, and 18 states have recreational adult use.
So what do you say to the politician that's standing up on the Hill and says, I don't care what other states are doing, I don't need to use them as a model, it's important what we're doing here in Delaware?
Absolutely, but you always do want to look at what other states are doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but the smart thing is to look at best practices and to look at what other states are doing and see what works for your state and for your constituents. So I would say open your mind.
You know, the earlier that Delaware gets into this industry, the larger the market's going to be here in the state of Delaware. There'll definitely be enough industry to share. Cannabis is recession-proof. We've now proven that through the pandemic, and actually have increased sales exponentially.
In the report's conclusion, McGinnis states, each year that we fail to capitalize on this opportunity means more money could flow to neighboring states instead of being invested here. Retired Lieutenant Thomas Bracken, Executive Director of the Delaware State Troopers Association, would like to bring the debate back to what they see as unanswered questions about marijuana's true impact. He believes legalizing the drug takes away a tool for police to get violent criminals off the street. Mr. Bracken, thank you for joining the agenda. The Delaware State Troopers Association has been very clear about their position in regards to marijuana. The objections, of course, are in regards to safety and bettering the lives of Delawareans, making sure everyone's safe. Could you expand a little bit on your objections?
Sure. So from a law enforcement perspective, we saw and continue to see several legitimate, we feel, concerns with the legalization of marijuana. I guess I could start with, first and foremost, we are in agreement with Governor Carney's positions on, the health factors, but more importantly, that I think the jury is still out on whether marijuana is or isn't potentially a gateway drug, and I think it kind of depends on the person that you're talking to, whether they have that ability to just deal with the marijuana, and I know there's a lot of people who do. They smoke marijuana, they never try any other drugs, they never go on to any other drugs, but there are some who do. We look at it from a holistic look that legalizing marijuana today here in Delaware would likely lead to additional potential crimes and a public safety issue. The one concern that we've had all along is, certainly we're dealing with everything we can deal with the violence and the gun violence. And so while we don't believe a lot of the rhetoric that there's a lot of people in prison for possession of marijuana, I think that's not necessarily true. I think if anybody did a deep dive into anyone who is doing any kind of time for possession of marijuana, you would look at the plea that they took to that charge, and what the other charges were likely were more serious, and they took the plea to the lesser charge and they got sentenced accordingly. However, what we have found out anecdotally, and you can talk to anybody in law enforcement, anybody in narcotics enforcement, you can talk to even members of the AG's office, is that while the bigger drug dealers don't necessarily deal in marijuana, which we know they don't bother with that necessarily, many of them use it recreationally. And we have been able to build numerous cases, taking violent criminals off the streets based off of our ability to further an investigation based on marijuana arrests. Now, I know the arguments against that are, should we or shouldn't we do that? And I don't prescribe that. That would be something that I think the citizens of Delaware need to decide. But I can assure you that members of our Delaware State Police units and other law enforcement units use that ability to put together cases.
What is the pulse right now on the road from law enforcement professionals in regards to this legislation and the ideas of marijuana and legalization of that?
It's a mix. I'll be honest with you, Kerwin. I think you'll find that the average rank and file trooper, when you talk to them about this, it doesn't really have a major impact on them day to day, since they know now already that personal use amounts of marijuana are not going to be prosecuted, so they don't, and with juveniles they write the summonses and they move on. But I think they also all do know that it would certainly cause a disruption in their ability, particularly the folks like your governor's task force, your narcotics folks, the people that are out there doing that on an everyday basis, the law enforcement officers, would certainly say that legalizing marijuana would certainly have a negative impact on their ability to do their jobs. Now, we have a lot of tools to determine if you're under the influence of alcohol.
And I think it's important that people know this.
We do not have the same level of technology as it relates to under the influence of marijuana. As you know, I'm sure, and the pro-marijuana advocates know, marijuana stays in your system. So you may not actually be high, but when your blood gets tested, you may have some level of THC in your blood, right?
The chambers of commerce are concerned about marijuana in the workforce, and that is a problem with the bill. We simply don't have the ability to test active cannabinoids in your system. The bill has a very convoluted approach to marijuana in the workforce. This is an issue that can be solved by technology. For your viewers, if they are out there and they have a way of doing a marijuana breathalyzer, you're going to make billions.
So the agenda has a magic time machine, okay? We have one brought into the show, and I'm using it now, and I'm fast forwarding into January 2022. What do you want to see happen in regards to this legislation when you go back into session?
So we're going to look at it as brand new, continue to have conversations with our colleagues. I'm going to be working with members of the Black Caucus, members of the Republican Caucus, to try to find out what their feelings are moving forward. We're going to put together a new bill, draft it. Hopefully, once we get back in session in January, we're going to file that bill and start the process over again, getting it through committee. I'm not waiting till June. I want to do it early. And the goal is to get it on the agenda so we can have a vote, so my colleagues will be on the record with the public on where they actually stand on this.
I believe the bill will be substituted, which I believe is appropriate, given that how many amendments it has. I believe the bill's sponsor will take a look at those amendments and work with those of us who are interested in seeing this pass in some form, or those who are maybe not in favor of it passing, but at least would vote in favor of it if it was the right bill. And those are two different people, two different groups of people. And try and create some sort of substitute bill to House Bill 150 that incorporates the amendments. This is a house of cards. This is absolutely a house of cards.
I still remain very hopeful about the legislation passing. I really do. And I think that it's really going to come down to creativity, looking at what is actually needed for it to be passed. The bottom line is this: it comes down to votes. Period, okay? You don't get those votes, it's not going anywhere. So based on your audience and you needing the votes, what are the pieces of that legislation that need to be included so that you get their votes?
I mean, I think that there's more work that needs to be done among the legislature and those that philosophically support it to come to the table and discuss the terms and whatnot and get this done for the 61% of Delaware voters that want to see cannabis prohibition end.
The debate in Delaware would be moot, of course, if marijuana is legalized at the federal level. Congressman Jerry Nadler, a New York Democrat, reintroduced the MORE Act in May of 2021, which would end marijuana prohibition. Passing the marijuana bill through the Senate and through the House in Delaware still has one final hurdle to overcome before it becomes law. Governor John Carney, in May of this year, reaffirmed his opposition of legalizing the drug, regardless of the public's view becoming more favorable of marijuana. Legislators on both sides of the aisle agree it will not pass until the right bill is presented on the floor. Thank you for watching The Agenda.